Welcome to the Pedal Collaborative podcast. We're so glad you're here. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Pedal Collaborative podcast. I'm Alan with my co-host, Pauly Boy.
Yes, we're back again for another week of episode.
Yeah,
yes. Just let that go. Another week of episode. And today we're talking about amplifiers and amp simulation, which after doing reverb and delay on our last two episodes, we're now at the back end of your signal path. Before we get into that, though, Alan had a little field trip and wanted to talk about that a bit. So, Alan, tell us about your overseas pedal experience.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I am, in my day job, I work for a company based out of Denmark, and once a year, it requires me to go over to the Copenhagen area. And it's a fortunate thing. I really enjoy every time I go. And what I've started to do in my travels is to try and find, pedal builders, pedal shops, all those sorts of things that just kind of fit into this passion of mine, of ours, for Paul, yourself, myself, and all of our listeners. And find some unique things. And one of the companies that I have kind of had my eye on is a Danish-based pedal company called Nordvang, Nordvang, as it were in the English spelling. So I've seen their stuff quite a bit, and I just reached out and I just said, "Hey, my name is Alan, and I'm coming over. I would love to meet you, see the shop, that sort of thing." And to be fair, I mean, I've heard of it before. I've never played any of their stuff, and I've known they're pretty high end and really, really high quality. I just had never had a chance to. And Henrik, who is the owner, he just welcomed me in, made me at home, made me feel at home. We grabbed some coffee. I got to pet his dog. All good Danish things. And he has a really neat little shop in Copenhagen where he designs and builds, and he kind of showed me his lineup. And let me just say that we've already done the drive episode. We did like two of them, I think, and the Nordvang stuff, none of that was really on the radar in terms of I guess when we were recording that episode. But I mean, he has taken some of the classic pedals such as the Klon and the Timmy, the Blues Breaker, and a few others, the Tube Screamer. He's taken all those classics and he has kind of given it his own taste, doing it with really, really high end components and making some selectabilities, if you would, in terms of like some of the dip switches and that sort of stuff, to really take those classic circuits and make them unique while true to it, but then also taking it up a notch. And man, I'll tell you, I would recommend anybody go to the website real quick because that's the quickest way to get there. NordvangCustom.com.
We will link to it in the description too, so you guys can check it out right there.
This is something that we're going to dive into much more. There's in terms of quality of components, but what Henrik is doing, I mean, the components he's using, he was telling me about them, and I was like just drooling over the quality of it, and seeing them up close is like really like incredible. If you have any of his pedals, unscrew the back, take a look. You'll know what I'm talking about. If not, go to the website and just kind of, he has gut shots of his pedals. They're really cool looking. So it really makes me wonder, what value to the tone do the components have? So I know, Paul, you and I were just chatting before we started recording this, and it's something that I want to kind of like dive into personally, and probably have a video that we post later. But I mean, let's look at the Skyline, which is his Blues Breaker. I mean, US dollars is like what, $365 for that thing? Is that any more, or is it any higher quality than, let's say, the $40 Joyo British overdrive that I got sent from Amazon? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just curious, and I think I know the answer, but I want to hear the answer.
I'm really excited to dive into this too, just because I am sometimes a skeptic for all the high-end gear I like. Sometimes I'm very skeptical of componentry and if it's on mumbo jumbo. And then sometimes things just stand out and you're like, yeah, that definitively is better in literally every single way. I can't make an argument against it. So I haven't got my hands on these yet. I'm excited to borrow them once you're done putting them through the paces, and then we can do some shootouts and stuff. So
yeah, man. Yeah. No, I'm super pumped. So, well, but I mean, componentry is definitely something that kind of fits into what the episode today is about, as well, honestly, as just multiple circuits of the same thing kind of floating around everywhere. Like, for example, again, sorry about drives again, we had talked about, I think we talked about on the drive section, like the Greer Lightspeed being like a transparent overdrive that I really, really enjoy. And I didn't realize that was basically a Timmy topology or typology. I didn't realize that. And Henrik was telling me about that because he also has one that he calls the altitude. And I was like, oh. And I was like, just kind of chatting with him about like, oh man, like there are really only a few circuits out there, and every builder tends to just make their own version of it, which again harkens back to our episode early on, Paul, when you were talking about your full drive, which is a tube screamer based.
Yeah, not realizing I had two tube screamers because it's just, it's a full drive. That's its own thing.
Right.
But no, right. It was a tube screamer.
Yeah. But that plays well into our discussion today, because I think the same thing can be said about amps. That being, there really are only a certain number that are out there in terms of circuits. They've been tried and true, and a lot of builders will really start just kind of making their own version of that. So there's my segue back into amps and amp sims.
Beautiful segue from your little field trip, which we will also be talking more about Nordvang with them, correct?
Yes.
That is coming.
Yeah, coming I talked to Henrik about it and invited him to be on this on the podcast. So I'm excited to just that happen.
Learn. That sounds like an episode for me to learn and come with a couple questions and just sit there and listen. So I'm excited about that.
Absolutely.
Segueing into amps, I think that's a really good point, because like the journey that we've discussed for basically every pedal type as we've gone through the Signal Chain series, I've tried a bunch of amps and amp simulators now as well. And it's funny because as a younger man, I was always like chasing the shiny toy amp of, nude boutique builder, a Dr. Z, Bad Cat, insert brand here. Had to have it, had to play it, had to try it. And then this is even, it's probably 10 years ago, I realized I was like, everything's just like a Vox or a Fender circuit. And at the end of the day, it's either like a 6V6, a 6L6, or an EL84, and then features stacked on top of that for tone shaping.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get effects baked into it, like reverb or vibrato. And it was very eye-opening to like kind of do a shootout of like an amp that costs $3,000 with an amp that costs $600, and realize that I wasn't necessarily hearing that big of a difference at the time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the builders that built like Fender and Vox amps are still tried and true awesome amplifiers. There's some duds in the lineup because that's how it works with anything, but they still make great stuff alongside all the boutique stuff. And I know you kind of had a similar journey, yeah?
I did, and I think like my journey with the amp side of things is really, bless you, kind of fits into everything else in like the way that I've done it is like I just kind of fell into something. Oh gosh, no, let's back up. If we're being completely honest with the starts of journeys, I'm thinking back to my very first electric guitar and amp scenario. When I turned 20, my parents bought me a guitar, and what I wanted was a Les Paul Black Beauty. And this is not about amps. It will get there.
All right, I'm with you on the journey.
Wanted a Les Paul Black Beauty, and I was able to get one of the Korean-made Epiphones because that's what we could afford. Meaning the Gibson price range was just out of the question. But got that, and I think honestly, I think I'd seen that on like Musician's Friend, in a magazine or something, and just loved the look of it. And I'm emphasizing the word look, but it was like, oh, that's what I want. That's the one I can picture myself. Having never played it, right? The same thing happened, and we can talk about that in another episode because I'm
that's a whole nother rabbit trail of aesthetics, making
trail.
Something sound good. So
yeah,
we'll keep that for its own.
Yeah. So the same thing happened though with amps, and I had gone to a festival and seen Radiohead, and they had like 5 AC30s like on stage, and it was so freaking loud and glorious and awesome. And so then I'm like, oh, I want an AC30, but again, price wise, couldn't do it. So what I could afford at the time was a little AC10, I think, but one of the solid state ones, not a so it probably wasn't even an AC10. I forget what it was. It was like a little 2x10 Vox AC style. It was solid state. It had the classic diamond grill. So it looked like a Vox, and I was happy because it looked like I was Radiohead. I mean, not so much with my Les Paul, but amp wise. So that's like where I first started with.
Did you say which model it was? Do you know which model it was?
Jeez, I wanted to say it was an AC10, but I don't think that's right because I think the AC are all tube based. Let me look it up. But okay. as I was, that's a little tube. Man, I don't know because it was like 20 years ago at this point. Oh my God, I'm dating myself. 20 years ago when that came out, when I had this. I'll look it up and we'll put it in the notes. But I wanted that Voxy chime, and that was like the sound that I wanted to get. And then, when I started realizing that the Les Paul into that wasn't what I was getting. And also, honestly, the solid state just did not have that thing that I wanted. I wanted a tube driven. As I started then collecting into or stepping into like what the next things were, I really just started trying. I didn't really fully understand how circuitry, how tubes, how speakers, how any of that actually affected the sound. Like now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I not know that? But I was young. I had no idea. The internet was not what it is today. I fell into then a little Fender Pro Junior, little 1x10 EL84. Have you ever played one of those?
I have. I actually really love that amp because it's a Fender voiced amp with EL84 tubes.
Yeah.
And that's typically the Vox EL84, and Fender usually just 6V6 or 6L6.
Correct.
And since this is relating to that, probably one of the better pedal platform amps out there for money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it's because it's a simple two knobber, right? It's like if I'm not mistaken, it's just like a master and a tone. I mean, there may be a gain, but I don't think so. It sounded so damn good. Mic'd up, not mic'd up. I mean, as a little 10-watter, you could get a lot of tone at a relatively low volume. And it being so simple, like I was able to even change the sound a whole lot by adding I bought a Weber Alnico speaker for it and completely changed the sound, taking it even more into that chimey Vox territory. So, to me, I'm a Vox guy. I'm a telly into a Vox guy, and I'm okay with that.
Yes. So, speaking of the early journey, because I will relate, my first amp that I got was like an amp with my guitar. So we don't count that. That's like the one you get with like the Squier pack. It's like a little Fender 15-watt solid state amp. But my first amp that I bought cognitively was a Frontman 2x12, like a Fender Frontman.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I actually kind of really liked that as a solid state amp. I had no complaints. What happened to me, though, is I started playing with a new band, and the other guitar player had this crazy Ampeg. There's an Ampeg. I don't remember the model of. There's a guitar and an amp of like their flip top series. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where the top of it, like you can like the tubes sit on top of it, and the componentry is exposed.
No.
So my friend Phil, he, I guess, got it at like a yard sale, and it wasn't working, and it only needed some like cheap parts from Radio Shack, and then he had this like really cool tube amp.
Oh wow.
And it was like I'd heard other tube amps before, like seeing bands as a teenager, but also like when you're seeing live, you don't really pick that out of a mix or anything. It was the first time I had like firsthand experience like listening to a tube amp right in front of me, and the difference between that and my frontman was like so noticeable and like different, that I then sought out getting a tube amp, and I did some research. Just being a little bit younger than you, I had the internet. I was able to use it a little bit, but I still was kind of.
Did you have the internet? Like, was it like? Did you have to do dial up? Like,
this was still dial up, yeah.
Okay, because you knew what that was. I just saw like a meme of like how to torture your kids now in 2024 is just to like have them sit in front of a computer with the AOL Running Man and this like screaming dial-up sound for 5 minutes, so that way they can just understand and value the internet more.
You can also just make that with the Chase Bliss Lossy, so just do that.
Oh my gosh, that's what the Chase Bliss Lossy is. They couldn't get the AOL name, so they just called it Lossy.
Yeah, there you go. But so I did my research, and I landed on I wanted a Hot Rod Deluxe, a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, and I had that for years. I actually had that when I knew you. Too, because it was kind of always like my backbone that I could rely on, and I got like other amps, but I kept that one for a long time just because it was really great. I loved what was done to it by George Alessandro, which had a really cool mod that just like made it have more headroom, which you didn't really need at 40 watts, but he did it. I had him do that to 2 of my Fender amps. We'll get there later.
I love the name for me, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. You as a Vox guy, so I'm a Fender amp guy, and I learned that by going through tons of different amps and realizing that at the end of the day, the way that a Fender amp like rounds out is exactly what I want my guitars to sound like. And I do also play a Tele most of the time. Tele Strat SG is my main. And I've always liked that the Fender platform, I think, can encapsulate different aspects of each of those. I love the way it makes a humbucker guitar sound like that warm, jazzy sound that I want to come out of that. Like, my SG can clean up to, like, Nat King Cole style tones if I need to with a Fender amp.
Dude.
So, yeah. But I did very quickly realize, especially when, like, going to college and living in dorms, you can't have a 40 watt amp if you want to keep playing guitar in like to practice. That was a very, very quick realization for me.
Yeah.
And kind of like just teasing ahead, we didn't have amp sims the way we do now. I think like the Fender Pod or the Line 6 Pod.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Was like the closest thing to giving you like emulation. And I don't even think they did amp simulation at the time. Did they? Did the Line 6 Pod do amps?
The original one? I don't know if I would call it amp simulation, meaning like it wasn't like, or not amp emulation. I think it was amp simulation. I'm going to pull that up. I think I've got to go to like some museum website to find that one.
Yeah, I had a floor pod, the one that they took. It wasn't the red kidney bean, but it was like the first one they made as like a stomp box.
Okay, no, it does have amp models. It totally does.
So, and it was just unacceptable to me, I'm pretty sure. I was like, this doesn't sound good. I don't want to use this when I know I could just use an amp. So that is when I started to try to find small amps, to what you were saying earlier, small amps like the Fender Pro Junior that could get me good tone at a lower volume level. That was like that was the chase for a long time, and I found it. It's probably my biggest regret of things I sold, but for the way I play guitar, the pedals I use, and how I make stuff happen, I had a 60s Fender Princeton that I got similarly to my friend Phil, where I swapped, like, I had like a newer crate, huge 2x12 crate tube amp. I don't know if you remember that brand. I don't even know if they're still around.
Yeah, I remember that brand.
I think the one I had was the V18.
Okay.
And I traded it to a guy who had what he described as busted old Fender amp. Okay. And I wanted to meet with it. This is like Craigslist trade back in the day. And I went to meet up with the guy because I was like, well, I already have my Hot Rod Deluxe and I'm looking for something small. And he's like, it works, but like it has some issues. And I meet up with him and like, this is a 2-prong 60s Fender amp. And I look at it, I'm like, this is like a blackface Princeton. Like, I should definitely do this trade even if it doesn't work, because like even broken, it's probably worth more than the crate amp was. So I did the trade. I took it home and I went to Radio Shack and bought a new fuse and it worked perfectly.
Oh my gosh.
I then did some further modification and cleanup with the help of professionals. The aforementioned George Alessandro did some great work. But that amp was far and away the best pedal platform amp I ever had. Yeah. It was the kind of thing where like actually one of our friends, AJ, when I first like really talked to him was actually at a house show that I was playing at in college. And he came up to me because he's like, dude, your guitar tone is so sick. And he's like, what's the secret? I was like, it's this little Fender Princeton. It just like makes everything sound good. Like no matter what pedal you threw into it, like it just could take it. It had enough headroom that like, and then you could get it to break up if you drove a drive into it. So you got some amp breakup. I miss it every day. I miss it every day. So the long story, but basically I got glossy-eyed over a custom Bad Cat that had red sparkly Diner Tolex, and it was out of my price range unless I sold my Princeton, and I sold my Princeton. And I sold my Princeton to a guy with the intention of once I could, I was going to buy it back from him. But he ended up pawning it because he needed to like do something. This is also a very musician in the mid 2000s, 2010s. Like, oh, I need to do this, so I need to pawn my amp so I can then do this and I'll buy my amp back. And somebody bought the amp and it never came back. So
oh man,
I chased something shiny and I lost a diamond in the process. So that's what happened to that, unfortunately.
Write that down because that could be a lyric for something that you're doing.
I don't remember what I said, but we'll listen to it back and I'll write it down when I listen back. But yeah, so the Princeton, I danced around. I've had Voxes, I've had all sorts of different boutiques, but the Princeton, I sort of defined for myself as when I was looking for a pedal platform, that's where I landed. And I still think about that amp like literally every day. It's actually a regret of mine. So there you go. But anyhow, I digress.
I spent my time with
poetic about this.
Yeah, I mean, I spent my fair share of time with a Fender circuit as well. I mean, not the Pro Junior per se, but I mean, when I got into a place where I needed or wanted more volume, more tone, whatever. Our good buddy, and I think this is the third time we've dropped his name on this, Chris, with Like Jones pedals. He was always like the I don't want to say grandfather because that ages him, but like he was the senior in our trade cycle. So like he would be done with something and moving on to the next thing. And then he would tell me like, hey, I'm moving something on. Are you interested? And I always looked up to him. I still do, but as this guru of tone knowledge, and whatever it is that he was into was something that I wanted to pay attention to. So he had a Dr. Z, oh crap, I do not remember the name of which model
I know which one it is because I actually, borrowed it from you, but gave it back to him. It was the Galaxy.
Yes.
The Galaxy 40 watt.
I'm watching you type in our Google Drive, and I'm like, you just typed in mass. I'm like, that's not it. Oh yeah, the Galaxy. And I was playing the Galaxy the day that you met me at that thing with Chuck. And I mean, definitively Fender tone, like no doubt about it. 2x10, 40 watts, glorious sound. So nice. It was great. It was
basically actually the boutique version of my Hot Rod Deluxe.
Yes.
Basically the exact same amp.
Yeah. So I really liked it. It never quite fully did it for me because it wasn't that Vox sound. But that's okay because I think when you're on this journey, no matter where you are in the journey of finding your tone, the end of the chain is very, very important, and finding what is you. And if you don't know, obviously, like, experimenting is a great way to do it. And we're about to dive into the digital side of things here with amp sims. A lot of the things that are out there now give you a whole lot of options for very little bank money, right? So like you can really start determining what you like without having to, I mean, like, because I'm looking at our list here, and we're talking well over $1,000 for a lot of these things. Like, that's not chump change, no matter who you are. Well, okay, maybe for some people, but for me, it wasn't. And I think I got that Galaxy for somewhere around $1,400, and like I loved it for what it was, but it wasn't something I was like, it's just I'm just gonna let it sit. It's not doing.
Well, it's also unbelievably loud, which is hard to use in any setting. And at the time, you were mainly playing in church, so it's like, this is going to sit in a cabinet, isolated. I'm going to listen to it through in-ears and a microphone. It's like, why do I have this huge monstrosity that I can't ever really listen to?
Right. So I then started to realize, like, it's part of like my honing in my sound and what is me. And when I came to the realization that I really do like low watt to Vox types, I then ended up getting, I just accepted that, and got a little AC-15 handmade one. Actually, not a Vox, but like a boutique one. And oh goodness, I am drawing a blank on the name of the company that I got it from.
Is that Frugal?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little plug for Mark at Frugal Amps. I mean, it's been over decades.
Is it Mark Moser? Is his name?
It is Mark Moser. Yeah. I think it's frugalamps.com. It's been a little over a decade since I bought anything from him, but man, he was able, frugalamps.com. He did some custom builds for me in the tiniest chassis, like lunchbox types I've could ever consider.
I remember when you had was that 1974X Marshall one. Yeah. That I believe actually one of our friends still has. But that was a really killer one.
Doesn't AJ still have that?
I think he does still have that one. And then I had him do two things. I had him modify my one amp, and then I also had him build me a Maz clone, because I wanted it to be like a Dr. Z, and I had do you remember I had like the empty cabinet and everything?
Yeah.
That I had him build like a Maz clone that was like a little bit different for my purposes and had a reverb.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
So Mark, yeah.
Well, he's fantastic. So if anybody wants to get like a solid point-to-point wired, like really good, like killer stuff, but at a frugal price, I would highly recommend checking out his stuff. Frugalamps.com. Really good stuff. But yeah, I just realized I am an EL84 into, I could do a 10-inch or a 12-inch, doesn't really matter, but a low watt EL84 box, that's my vibe. Like, that sound is my vibe. So when I got out of the amp world, like physical amp world, I knew what was still me, and it was that sound. And so then the question became, which amp sim is going to do it for me?
Yep. And similarly, before we fully dive into that, I think an important part of how pedals play into this, which we kind of alluded to while we were just going through the like journey of getting to where we are now, but different pedals hit different amps differently. Like, I have certain overdrives that, like, if I was playing it into a Vox, it's going to sound different than if I'm playing it into a Fender circuit. And if it's like a 6L6 tube versus even a 6V6 tube, it's got a little bit of different character. And you'll hear me say this, I think I've said it on episodes before. At the end of the day, your hands are your biggest thing that affects your tone. But I think after that, it's your amp. Your hands and your amp are probably the two biggest things that craft like your style, your tone. And Alan said like his vibe is like a smaller watt Vox amp, and I said mine's a Fender. That's something that like, only you can sort of figure out what sounds good to your ears based on that. But it is important to consider that it is one of the most, it's going to color things more than any of the pedals you have, because it's like the big speaker source at the end of the process.
Can I add something else in there?
Of course.
I think on the hands end of things, I won't say particularly like the guitar choice is as important, but what will affect the tone is the pickups that you're using. And And if you think about, from the science of it, your hands are manipulating the strings. The strings are creating a magnetic field, which is then being picked up by the magnets within the pickup that you're using, and being then converted into an electrical signal that ultimately gets to the amp, gets amplified, hence amp, and then reconfigured out into an audible sound via the speaker. So you can affect the sound anywhere along that chain, but the beginning and the end is going to be your pickup and how you manipulate the strings with your hands, and then the amp and speaker.
Didn't know you're getting a physics lesson today, did you? Didn't know that was going to happen on the episode today.
We could just always throw physics in.
Yeah, well, it's part of sound, which is the part of sound I find fascinating. Is I actually almost failed physics in high school, but if you apply it to these things, I start to understand how it works. So I figure
you just didn't care in high school.
That's also true. Yeah. But yes, good thing to add pickups. And I mean, pickups, amps, pedals, your hands, they all interplay. But it is interesting how I feel like amps are kind of one where I notice actually this might be more of a result of amp simulation. I feel like certain pedals sound totally different based on the sim you're using. So let's segue there. Talk about some we've tried, some we like, some we want to try, like we do every episode. Did I jump into this before you, amp sims?
I mean, we probably both, realistically got our foot dipped into the water around the same time. Oh my goodness, my very first one. Sorry, I'm going back to 2000. I mean, this is pre Line 6 pod. I had a Johnson J station.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. I have no clue if it's still around. It was essentially a pod, but just like a different name. You can get one used at Guitar Center for $55 right now. I don't remember why I bought it. I think it was because I had like a headphone out or something. I don't know. But it was in that journey of needing to get a quieter volume, playing at my parents' house or my own apartment or whatever. Because when I was in college, I had the cops called on me because of the band we were playing at my apartment and got too loud. So I have a noise ordinance violation. It's fantastic on my record. But I think I got forced into using amp sims at church because of needing to have a quieter sound. Because one thing is universal, and I don't care who you are as a guitarist, you want more volume, and sound guys, they want less volume from you. So
yes, that is a universal experience, and I'm also very guilty of the memification of I sound check at one volume and then bump my stuff up just a little bit afterwards. Just a little bit, move that volume knob a little bit.
Every time. Or I'd always check with they want my hottest signal, quote unquote, and I would always give them my maybe step 2, not my clean, but just my slightly overdriven, and not letting them know, oh, by the way, I have 4 more stages of gain and volume that I'm going to hit you with during the event. Anyway.
Yeah, incredible. So yes, amp simulation. So I guess technically a Johnson J station for you and a floor pod for me, which I didn't know had that. I don't remember that. I kind of want to, I feel like that might still be at my parents' house. I want to ask them.
Oh, it probably is.
It probably is. But I think for me, the first modern amp sim, which is what I would consider actually useful, I got the Helix.
Okay.
So going from a Line 6 floor pod, which was actually, I think, probably legitimately back in whenever that was, early 2000s, the last time I had a Line 6 product until 2017 when I got a Helix.
Yeah.
And I was very skeptical of the Helix for a long time because they were starting to pop up, and you started to see the Kempers and the Helixes and the Axe effects start to appear.
Yeah.
And a couple of friends jumped into it, and I was like, I don't know if that's for me, man. Tube amps all the way. And our friend Scott one time I came to either I went to his house or he came to visit because he lives not in Lancaster, and he had created my pedal board and my amp as like a scene in the Helix as like a preset, and told me just to like plug in and play, just to like he's like you don't have to just do it, and it was like such a close enough replication, and I could do it with headphones on that I actually ordered one when I was at his house because I came home and ordered it the same night.
Oh wow!
And so I got a Helix, and for like a couple of years, completely forsook all other pedals. Actually,
great usage of the word forsook.
Thank you. I wanted to sound smart while talking about amp simulation since you did all the physics earlier. But so and what I kind of realized and why I actually stepped back into buying all the pedals I have is I just really like the amp simulation more than the individual boxes the Helix could do. And so I ended up with a Stomp, and that was kind of my first journey into what I call modern amp sim. And it honestly still hasn't worn off the novelty of just being able to like pull up any amp I want to emulate. And some of them sound better than others. But it hasn't really worn off yet on me when we talk. We're even here talking through this list of amps we've tried, and I'm like, oh, there's a Dr. Z in here. Oh, there's a matchless amp in here. Oh, like I can just dial it in, mess around with it, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And I remember kind of waxing poetic to you about that when I got it. I was like, dude, you gotta get one. And then you love to do, you're like, I'm gonna try a different one.
That's right.
What's the one you grabbed that you still have?
Well, I mean, okay, so I've gone through my list of them. But I'm looking at two. I actually have two. I have a Stomp just like you. But the one that I'm looking at that I actually really, really enjoy is the Walrus Audio ACS1. And I think, so you talked about how like the Helix is, and it's really good because I mean, I have the software on as in the Stomp version, I have it on my computer. It's great all in one, like where you can have all your effects, all this sort of stuff. And it is also really good as an amp sim, by itself. But, I was wanting something smaller, and different because you know me, like, well, Paul has that, whatever. I'm not going to get that. I'm going to get something different.
Yeah, you got to get something different.
Yeah. I think I started though with the Strymon Iridium.
Oh, you're right.
I think that's what I started with.
Yes.
And it sounded really good, as a lot of Strymon stuff does, but it also felt like I was just sitting in a studio, and studio is probably like my least favorite place to play. And so I was like, oh yeah, try something different. And I grabbed the ACS1, and, one stand apart thing that the ACS1 has that the, Strymon doesn't is that the ACS1 allows you to do two totally different amp sims at the same time, left and right. So you can choose a left, you can choose a right, or you can have the same thing on both, but you can choose separate ones, and completely separate settings. So you could literally have identical Vox AC30s left and right, but with like a minor tweak, like you want one with a little more gain, a little less volume, or you want to adjust the EQ, you can do that. Or you can change the cabs. With all the options that you can get on the Strymon, and they have a ton of options, you just couldn't do two at the same time. So that's kind of what made me fall in love with the ACS1. It kind of gives you a little bit of depth, that having a single amp sim at one time just doesn't quite give you. But also, as I mentioned, the Iridium from Strymon kind of has this like studio vibe. The ACS1 to me felt like a live stage. I don't know how the difference in them capturing these things, no clue on that. But my feel in my ears is that the ACS1 feels like I'm playing on stage. And that's kind of what has drawn me to that.
Yeah, I remember you saying that actually back when you first got into it, and just a little inside baseball on how I shape tones in the Stomp, which I actually currently am not using the Stomp. We'll get to that in a second. But I remember we were both sort of with the Iridium because I was playing with one at the same time. It sounds incredible, but it almost sounds like your guitar has already been mixed and mastered. Which I usually like a little more of like a lo-fi-y sound to start with, even if I clean it up in post. And so one of the things I do with my stomp to kind of create that stage or playing live feel is no matter what amp simulation I'm using, and I know we talked about this too, I don't use any IRs. I just use all stock. So that's something a lot of people are like, oh, what IRs do you use? I do not use any of them. I just use amps and dial them to make them sound how I want.
Yeah. IRs, by the way, it stands for impulse response. It is code word for basically a captured, a lot of people can capture those sounds and of a specific amp, so to speak. Like you could get Johnny Greenwood's AC30 captured as an IR and load that into any of these platforms.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good little aside on what that is, because I was just talking jargon. And so one of the first things I always do, though, to get that live feel as opposed to studio, because especially some of the amps more than others do sound like they might have been captured in like a very nice, clean studio environment, is I just immediately move the microphone away from the cabinet.
Ooh, yeah.
So it has just a little bit of separation that feels like you are listening to an amp from across the room, which is how you normally would play a real amp. So that's just tips or tricks for the HX Stomp. If you feel like you're a little too canned or in the box, go to your mic. First, mess with the mics, because that's something that changes a lot. We'll get into that some other time. But move it back, move away from your cabinet and make it feel less like your recorded sound and more like how you would hear it if you were listening to it in a room.
Yeah.
Now, where I landed, and I think I'm going to be here for a while, and it goes back to the amp I miss. I think I actually know exactly when I got this. It was last Thanksgiving, because I was at my parents' house down in North Carolina, and I texted you that I wanted to try it. And then I think we did like a 3-way trade where I ended up with this, which is very funny, because it was like, I think 2 days after Thanksgiving, you're like, hey, there's one on the way to you. And I was like, what the heck? Which another insight into the logistics of what Alan and I do behind the scenes. But is the Universal Audio Dream 65.
Yeah.
I heard someone playing it, which is what prompted my text to you. I forget, it was like a random Instagram video or something, and it sounded so dang good as like just a blackface Fender emulator.
Yeah.
And like 95% of the time in my Stomp, I'm either using the Princeton model or the Silvertone, which is basically like a Fender type circuit, just because I really, really like the Silvertone model. I think it's the dual twin or something in the Stomp. So I was like, well, if I always use these, I might as well try this pedal out just to kind of see what it's about. And what I like about the Dream, and you actually talked about this with your modifying of your Pro Junior with the speaker, is the dip switch is right on the front. You can change your speaker or mod your circuit the way that people popularly mod. That's tongue twister there.
It is.
The blackface Fender amp, so you can change your speaker, you can change your circuit, and then it also has built-in vibrato and reverb like on the amp sim.
Okay.
So it was just to me like the coolest, most flexible Fender blackface emulator out there, and I've been using that one basically ever since. I swap it in and out with the Stomp, but it's the one that I most go to just because it's the sound that I like.
I don't think I knew that you could do those circuitry mods, quote unquote, with switches.
Well, that's because literally, I don't think you opened this. You just sent it to me immediately, so you need to mess with it. I maybe
had it just shipped to you.
I think you might have, so.
I have 2 addresses. I have 3 addresses memorized. I have my home address, my work address, and Paul's address memorized.
I love that. I actually do now know yours by heart because of the sneakiness of shipping my wife a pedal. So
yes. Oh, which by the way, I listened back, and I misrepresented the situation. So and downplayed the significance in the role that Paul's wife had. In that, the reality is she did it all. She just shipped it to my house, or like I bought it so that it wouldn't show up on your bank account, but it was literally all her doing. She found it. She asked, "Do you think Paul would like this?" I'm like, "Yeah." That's it. Like, she did the rest of it. And I think I made it sound like we were partners in it, and really just partners in the sneakiness. The brains behind it all was your wife.
Brittany is the brains behind a lot of things, so I'm sure she'll appreciate the shout out here.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to like set the record straight.
Set the record straight, yes. And we do listen back to ourselves to hear the silly things we say, just so you guys know too. So, for whenever you guys call something out, I sometimes go back and rewind to see, did I really say that? But yeah, so how did we get Amp Sim 65 reverb shipped to my house?
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to really add to that other than I've really been super satisfied with that as a platform for pedals.
Yeah.
Because I think takes them really well.
Yeah. And I think that was, if people are like listening to this and wanting to kind of get an idea about, like what amp sim should I try out? Like all these sorts of things. I think there's a lot of things that you can look into, because all the ones that we've mentioned have been fantastic, like the Stomp, the Iridium, the UA stuff, the Walrus ACS1. Those are all really good. I mean, honestly, I haven't tried the Kemper or the Neural DSP or the new Axe stuff or any of the high end stuff. I haven't, and a lot of it's because I really do like having physical pedals, and I just don't want to drop that much into an all-in-one solution if I'm not going to use all of it. We may have I'm actually just thinking this now, Paul, like we have a guest lined up on the podcast who went from like full board into an all-in-one. So we can talk about that process, but for me, no, I don't want it. I want to have physical pedals. So size being an important thing that you might want to consider, like what size is that platform? Does it fit your budget? Does it have a headphone out? Super important to have a headphone out, and they don't all have that.
That is one knock on the UA stuff is I have a headphone amp that's on my desk in my studio anyhow. Right. So I use that, but it is a bummer it doesn't have a headphone out. Yeah. That is a bit of a bummer.
The Strymon, the Iridium has a headphone out, the ACS1 has a headphone out, the Stomp has a headphone out. What the Stomp has that the other ones don't, correct me if I'm wrong on the UA stuff, but the Stomp is also an interface. So most of the videos that I do are with the Stomp as my interface and my amp sim. Because if I'm just wanting to have like one less thing in the chain, I don't use the ACS1. So
the Stomp does have that as like a real big standout of like being a USB interface is pretty cool. Yeah. And it's like pretty solid too.
It is. Now I will say one thing, like these sims are really, they're all just software, right? That's all it is. It's software in a physical space, like a pedal platform. That's what I was thinking of. Software on in a pedal. There are some really good software only amp sims, and if I can shout out on ones that I've used and I really like, are the ones by it's a studio called Mixwave, and they have they actually licensed or in partnership with Benson, you can get the Benson Chimera amp sim software, but they also have a Milkman version as well. So if someone's like, I don't really want to have another platform, I don't want to have a pedal, I wanted it like completely computerized, I can highly recommend the Mixwave stuff.
Ooh, I have not actually messed with any of those.
Yeah. I pulled up the Benson version right now because that's what it's my go-to, because it's an AC, like a Voxy's type, right? But you can get a lot of their pedals are on there too. So like I have a digital version of the Benson Germanium Boost, their Germanium Fuzz, their preamp, their Tallbird Reverb, all tube reverb is in there as well as the amp itself and the cab with a bunch of speaker and microphone options, and it's all stereo. So
sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah,
that sounds pretty sweet.
The Milkman one is the Creamer. It's their Creamer, which is a Fender style, and you can get their little boost, the JHS. What is that little milk? Is it Milk Boy? What is their little delay boost?
I think it's just called the pedal? Milkman.
Okay, that's actually included on this too.
Interesting.
Yeah, Yeah. And then the Milkman trim and reverb unit is on theirs. So.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I didn't know that's what that was.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're tracking into like a GarageBand, Pro Tools, whatever, like, I mean, can you really tell the difference between a stomp, like a pedal, like a pedal platform, or a all digital one? I don't think so.
Someone will tell you can, and I would probably believe that you could, but honestly,
well, yeah, I mean, obviously,
pretty dang close.
Yes. Okay. So I think there are definitely specific things that you can tell the difference on, but if you are in the box completely and you're going to complain about it not being the exact sound of a tube amp, then we have another conversation to have.
Yes, 100% we have another conversation to have. So, as in the spirit of how we normally do these, we've talked all about the ones we've had, and we talked about how we got to amp sims. But is there anything out there on the market that you have your eye on wanting to try in this space?
Oh man, I don't think so, because I'm satisfied with what I have. And again, I think I mentioned it earlier. I know some things are coming out that I want to try, but usually for me, wanting to try something is because I've seen something that grabs my attention because I don't already have it or I haven't already tried it. But I think I'm pretty satisfied right now with what I have at my disposal.
I do think at some point you should try the UA Ruby, which is their Vox top boost.
I should. I know.
Just because I'm curious. I have not messed with any of their other ones other than the Dream. Just because as we went through this earlier, that's what I like.
Yeah.
But I am curious your review of the Ruby, like as a comp. And you could actually do an A/B with a real Vox amp if you want to. So,
that's true.
The one that I want to try just because I keep seeing it around everywhere, and also because it's the most, I think, accessible, is the Boss IR2 amp in Cab Sim.
Ooh, yeah.
I was looking it up when you were talking about the headphone out. It does have a headphone out on the back, so that's a big win. And it's nice to see Boss sort of like hopping into the fray, because Boss always makes a solid pedal. And making this at a price point of $199 where you can load in IRs from anywhere. It looks like it has like some built-in sounds as well.
Yeah.
Full stereo. A nice little USB-C for a Boss pedal, which almost feels weird since Boss has had the same aesthetic forever, but they have a USB-C jack on the back of this. Looks almost like uncanny to me for some reason.
Yeah. They have like a 1950s foot switch that they've had forever, but they've got USB-C.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I do want to check that one out. One, because I think it's nice that there's one at that price point, and two,
yeah, totally.
I'm sure it sounds good because it's a Boss pedal, so we'll have to check that one out at some point.
Yeah, totally. I like it.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say, where does that leave us for next time? Because we just kind of finished up the chain.
Yeah, so we got some interviews coming up here in September. The other thing we have is a surprise bonus episode as part of Signal Chain, courtesy of a listener of the show and follows the channel. The great idea of having an episode on the pedals that don't fit, because we have been really approaching this from the standpoint of like your traditional pedal board. Yeah. We talked on the very first how like neither of us use a ton of utility style pedals. I got flack for saying that EQ is not important. I stand by it for my own purposes, but others can use it and I understand how it's important. But the things that don't fit, so examples like the Meris Enzo, Chase Bliss Genloss.
You mean like the Chase Bliss anything?
Chase Bliss anything doesn't really have necessarily a traditional slot. So we're going to do an episode that is going to be sort of the odd duck pedals that are the ones that you can move around. Maybe you have a preference of where it goes. Mm-hmm. And so shout out to Sam Timmer for this idea. We'll really appreciate the suggestion, which also does, just to close out today's episode. The name of the podcast is the Pedal Collaborative Podcast. That's the name of our channel. But we do take that very seriously of questions, ideas, thoughts, things you want to hear, videos you want to see. We want to hear them because, there's a ton of people making content. I watch a ton of different content, listen to a ton of different content, but really truly getting to like interact with other people is, to me, at the heart of gear, is like talking about it together. And, oh, what'd you do with that? I met up with an old friend actually this afternoon and ended up with a quick exchange turning into like a 45-minute chat about all the things we were both playing with. So please feel free to ask us things, suggest things, critique things, share cool stuff you're doing. We want to hear about it. That's part of the spirit of why we're doing this, just to engage with people about gear outside of our own circles.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better
Anything
myself.
to add to yeah, okay, I was going to say anything to add? No? So.
No, I just think next time you say please, 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 I want you to sing it in the vein of Sabrina Carpenter.
All right, I'll work on that. I'll do that next time.
Okay.
But, well, everyone, we'll look to catch you next week with our Odd Duck pedals, and then we will have some interviews coming up here soon. So look forward to chatting with you all and continue collaborating.
All right, be well, everybody.